And so I will neither confirm nor deny if we actually did split that large amount of mushrooms. But in the following hours, I ended up having the most ecstatic, multi-orgasmic, pleasurable experience of my life.
Psychedelics are said to shift our fixed perspectives, giving us a bird's eye view of our own lives and helping to remove the lenses of cultural, religious, and social conditioning through which we are taught to see the world. They are being used therapeutically and somatically to treat depression, addiction, PTSD, and trauma, and many are using them to explore the ineffable, those unknown realms of consciousness and beyond. Join us in Adventures of the Psyche as we learn how psychedelics have transformed people's lives. Hello, friends, and welcome to Adventures of the Psyche. Today, we are joined by Razma, who, through a heroic dose of mushrooms, had a life-changing embodied experience that helped her overcome severe trauma.
I am going to share a story that has a trigger warning for themes of sexual assault and the subsequent trauma healing that resulted from that. So to tell my story, we'll have to wind back over a decade in time when I was an undergraduate studying human development and psychological services at Northwestern University. It's important to know that I was extremely naive and sheltered and hadn't even had my first consensual kiss at that time. Long story short, unfortunately, a few days before my 21st birthday, my virginity was taken by rape. In that experience, I had a tonic immobility trauma response, which is when your body involuntarily goes into a death feigning state because your nervous system decides there's no way that you're going to escape from this predator, and it's trying to minimize the physical damage that you might experience. So what happened to me is that I left my body and dissociated and floated up sort of towards the ceiling and no longer remembered anything after that moment. So being in the track to be a therapist, I delved into all the clinical literature on how to heal from sexual assault, and it was a pretty grim prognosis. The majority of people who go into a tonic immobility response in the context of sexual assault will go into this response again if they're presented with a similar stimulus, which for me was any type of potential of sexual encounter, because I was so naive and that was my first imprint. Additionally, most people will have PTSD if they go into a tonic immobility response. And as I scoured and devoured the rest of the literature, I unfortunately found that the traditional talk therapy researchers didn't have a recommended successful treatment recommendation at all. So I turned to the studies that I was doing in somatic and transpersonal therapy, being the huge nerd that I am, reading these textbooks on the side to try and understand what happened to me and carve out my own journey towards healing. So fast forward a little bit in time, and I was at a no fourth wall, immersive theatrical experience, kind of like a modern day Merry Pranksters. My friend comes up with the idea to split a large and unmeasured quantity of mushrooms. And I do not advocate doing this insofar as it's not very responsible to not know how much you're taking. And so I will neither confirm nor deny if we actually did split that large amount of mushrooms. But in the following hours, I ended up having the most ecstatic, multi-orgasmic, pleasurable experience of my life. So I was in a shared indoor community space at this gathering, and I was purring and vocalizing, and I was sonically stimulating myself through my throat, sort of like self deep throating myself, which actually is extremely regulating to the nervous system. So I was engaged in shaking and shouting, yes, 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 and other similar vocalizations and outward expressions of my pleasure in this shared communal space where there were a lot of people that I trusted around. And later on, I came to conceptualize this multi-orgasmic ecstatic experience as the most potent and apex moment of my sexual life thus far, insofar as any time previously that someone perhaps had offered to be more intimate with me sexually or had wanted to move in that direction, I would freeze and have an involuntary trauma response that felt really uncomfortable in my body. So I would avoid all those instances. So this provided my nervous system with an experience of being able to be in those pleasurable states where I felt safe with other people around, that there wasn't going to be an exploitation that was going to happen. And I am really grateful, and I credit this experience with allowing me to have a pattern to return to and a positive, pro-social, deeper groove in my next level of shedding a lot of the trauma that this sexual assault as my primary imprint of my sexuality that was placed upon me non-consensually. That inspired me to continue to create somatic sanctuary containers so that others could be inspired by having a supportive, transformative, and safe container for their own process. And also, having studied therapy at a graduate level, I was really shocked by the lack of trauma-informed knowledge present in that field. And so I continue to create entheogenic edutainment and share what I've learned on my healing journey to inspire others into knowing that you can heal, and it can be playful and pleasurable, and to have hope.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome, Marisa. It's an honor.
As we create safety in our own bodies and we recognize that's something that we actually have the power to create for ourselves, then that gives us that map how to get there in future situations that might perhaps set off our alarms, correct?
Exactly. Because my first imprint of my sexuality was a traumatic experience that was non-consensual, that was foisted upon me, whenever my body and my brain tried to plot what would happen to me if someone offered me a sexual experience, was more trauma. So it was a lack of incarnate imagination or lack of a positive experience to reference that was counter to this really deep trauma imprint. And what was really beautiful and unique and spontaneous about my experience was that I was witnessed by so many people in my pleasure. And I received the reinforcement in the days afterwards that others were inspired and catalyzed and were celebrating my vocalizations, to the point where several people asked me to recreate my moans and pleasure sounds so they could use it as their voicemail message, because they wanted other people to have that experience of witnessing me in my delight. So I received this amazing feedback from the collective that my pleasure creates pleasure. And that was really important for me in overcoming the shame and the feelings of selfishness I might have had around sexuality, because someone else's selfishness so deeply impacted me in my experience of sexuality that I didn't want to have some sort of impact like that on someone else.
Great, great. Thank you so much for sharing, Razma.
You're so welcome.